Ever wondered how top-class sales coaches help salespeople navigate, address, and overcome some of their biggest challenges?
Tune in for 15 minutes of coaching conundrums.
This is Coaching Conundrums, the video series which quizzes top-class sales coaches on how they would help sales professionals tackle a specific sales problem, all within the space of 15 minutes. My name is Richard Smith. I'm head of growth at My Sales Coach, and for our third episode, I'm delighted to be joined by the very summery-looking Tom Boston. Tom, welcome to the show. Can you provide the audience with a quick introduction and, why you're well-versed to talk on today's topic?
Yeah, thanks so much. Great to be here. For those who don't know me, my name is Tom Boston, one of the social selling coaches here at My Sales Coach. On LinkedIn, I am called a LinkedIn influencer nowadays. That's what they call me, which always makes me smile, especially with an accent like mine. But ultimately, I've been social selling now for over 5 years as a seller. About 40% of my pipeline was generated from leads on LinkedIn. And now I get to train sales teams, having trained hundreds of sellers over the time to utilize the platform to ultimately hit their target.
We're going to be obviously looking at a conundrum very much connected with that. And the conundrum that we're going to be talking about today is I'm struggling to create conversations on LinkedIn. At a time where it can feel harder than ever to book meetings, I'm hearing a lot from salespeople that they are finding it difficult to build pipeline right now. Prospects' inboxes are noisier than ever. Call pickup rates are going down. And yet we're hearing a lot that in sales, it's super important to be building your brand and leveraging social to good effect. And yet so many people seem to struggle with making LinkedIn that kind of reliable conversation starter. So Tom, for some context setting, how often would you say you deal with this conundrum, when you're working with salespeople? And why do you think so many salespeople struggle with this?
Yeah, I hear it a lot, right? It's often frustration, especially if you're investing time in LinkedIn. When I hear salespeople say, I'm struggling to start conversations on LinkedIn, usually if you dig a little bit deeper, it's actually, I'm struggling to sell on LinkedIn. And the reason for that is because LinkedIn's not really a place to sell, right? And we have this term, social selling. I don't know if I love the term, because actually what it insinuates is that we are supposed to be running a sales process on social media. But I love that word conversation, because actually that's what social media is for, right? Nobody wants to speak to a salesperson and nobody wants to be sold to. But people love on social media giving their opinions, giving their 2 cents, making themselves part of the conversation and showing their expertise. And it's our job to be a vessel for that conversation, to get it going, not to then sell, not to then jump in or maybe send a DM and say, hey, thanks for your comment. Would you like a demo? Right? It's to genuinely look at social as a place to create interesting conversations, of course, add to the conversation, but more importantly, drive your ICP to engage. Of course, we can utilize that in many, many ways. Maybe they'll be then part of a sales cadence. Maybe we'll call them up a week later, or we'll reference their comment in a video or an email. But what we don't want to do is try to close revenue on social media. That's not what it's for.
People want to be heard on LinkedIn. I love that. And let's cast our imagination to a one-to-one coaching session, Tom. So let's imagine that I've scheduled this coaching session with yourself, and I come along to that session and you ask me, Rich, what's on my mind? And I open up the conversation by saying that I'm dealing with this issue. I just say, Tom, I'm super frustrated. I just can't seem to create conversations with my ideal prospects on LinkedIn. So firstly, what questions would you start asking me to, I guess, get me to explain my view of the problem, to understand that problem in a bit more of a deeper level?
I guess first off, what I'd want to understand is your ultimate goals for starting those conversations, and I'd want to make sure that we're aligning with the use of social media, right? If you say to me, "Look, I want to start conversations so I can book more meetings, or schedule more calls, or sell more," then there's an opportunity for us to maybe reframe it. Well, actually, what's the use of social as part of your kind of sales
Right.
strategy? So that's the kind of first thing I'd look to understand. I mean, it's like anything, right? Let's understand the goals. Like, what do you want the outcome to be before we even start kind of driving that conversation? And we mentioned the phrase LinkedIn influencer at the beginning of the call. That is a goal for some people. That was never my goal, right? I just wanted to add some credibility to my ICPs as someone who's active in the space and is banging the same drum on social that they are in the email inbox of kind of prospects. So that would be my first question, right? Yeah, what are the goals? What do you want the outcome to be? And then we would move on to what are you doing right now to achieve that?
Let's imagine I come back to you and say, well, Tom, really what I'm trying to do is, I'm not having much success with my cold calls. I'm not having much success getting responses to emails. I want this to become a way of helping me to generate conversations which ultimately led to meetings with my ideal customers. So, how do you start to get me to understand how I can go about fixing that problem?
Yeah, well, first off, we would take a look at your current state. So, what does your LinkedIn profile look like at the moment? And there's a few things we could do, right? So, when we jump onto your profile, is it really easy for prospects to understand who you are, what you do, and how you can help them? If if it's not, make some changes, right? Change the banner, look at the about section, make it super, super easy for prospects to join the dots and understand who this person is and maybe how they could help. The next thing we would look at is, what's your content strategy? Okay. What are you doing on a weekly basis to add to the conversation? And more importantly, does your content parallel with your prospecting process? And are you bringing to life on LinkedIn the problems you solve for that you're leaving voicemails to prospects about and that you're emailing prospects about? Because that's going to, again, add some credibility. We think about that title's salesperson, right? If you jump on a salesperson's LinkedIn and it's empty, or it's full of self-serving content that doesn't reflect the thing that they're pushing, all the prospect sees is they've got a sales job, they've been told to sell something, and they don't really care,
Yeah.
right? In the modern age of selling, to stand out from the crowd, you have to be an ambassador for the problem that you solve, and content is a really great way to do that. So yeah, we'd look at your content. We'd say, look, what mediums are you using? Right? Have you posted a video? Have you tried a LinkedIn poll? Are you writing articles on the platform? Are you experimenting with things like memes and pictures and selfies? Like, there's such a wide breadth of content opportunities. And often I'll speak to salespeople and they'll say, "Well, I wrote something and it got 3 likes, and I, I'm embarrassed, and I'm never doing that again." And my challenge is to go, look, take your prospecting, find 3 problems that you solve for, use those as buckets for your content over the next month, try different things, see what resonates, but more importantly, drive the conversation.
Yeah, love that. And I guess just diving into that a bit deeper around the content strategy. So, you figured out that, let's imagine I have a pretty weak content strategy, right? Which a lot of
Mm.
salespeople watching this probably think, I don't really have a content strategy right now. So, what is the easiest place to get me to start with a content strategy? I guess in layman's terms, the steps that I do to build out that strategy.
Yeah, I mean, we've all stared at the blank screen when you click start a post,
Yeah.
right? And you know you've got to put something on the platform, but it's kind of like, what the hell am I going to kind of write? I always say, well, let's kind of zoom out a little bit, right? Because if we don't know our reason for posting, we're going to kind of struggle. So one thing that I talk to a lot of people I work with is finding their mission statement, and basically that means what's your why? What can people expect from your content? And ultimately, what do you want your personal brand? I often don't like using that phrase, but what do you want your personal brand to look and feel like? Because that will really help you drive what your content strategy um, should ultimately um, be like. It always makes me smile when someone says, I don't know what to post today, Tom." And I'll say, "Didn't you just do 2 hours of prospecting this morning?" "Oh, yeah, yeah." Take those conversations, right? All the things that you're talking about you can solve for, and just bring that to life, right? You don't have to do everything in one post. Just find one pain point that you solve for and start a conversation about that. I mean, I use humor to do that, right? People will see my content and they'll say, "I'm not going to create a funny video." And I'll say, "That's absolutely fine, because what you have to do is find the problem that you solve for and bring it to life in your way." I use humor to do it, but you could do so many things to yeah, shine a light on the problem you solve.
And I guess very quickly, let's imagine I say that sounds great, and I create some content and I get some great engagement on it from my ideal prospect. How would you help me figure out what's the best way of taking that engagement to creating maybe offline conversations?
Yeah, so let's start with the worst way, because that's always something that's good to cover. The worst way is to call up a prospect and say, "Hello, I saw you liked my post. Would you like to buy my stuff?" Which I've learned the hard way doesn't work, right? It will put people off from engaging with your content, and it's probably one of the biggest roadblocks actually in social selling. You're almost like shooting yourself in the foot. So often, what I would do is, if I do find that engagement, as tempting as it might be, I'll do nothing with it for about 3 or 4 days. I'll maybe engage back, right? I won't sell, not sell, speak, just a back and forth conversation or leave something insightful. And then 3 to 4 days later, they're added to my process. I'm not referencing the post or the comment that they left. I'm just running my standard prospecting cycle. But you know what? That kind of awareness, that brand awareness of the recognizing, oh, wait a second, I think, yeah, I saw his post earlier this week or last week, whatever it may be, and he left me a voicemail actually this morning. I've just had an email from him, and he sent me a video, and there's a voice note right on LinkedIn. And again, it's like joining the dots. Maybe I will give this person the time of day, because they seem to be, prospecting me in a way that's insightful. Um, I, I think that's the answer to like cold calling, right?
Yeah.
It worked for me massively. I'd get on the phone and people would almost recognize my accent, or they would reference themselves. The content, you don't have to lay it out as simply as that. I saw you liked the post. I want to speak to you. Like, you don't have to do it like that.
That's such great insight. And then finally, Tom, we all know that coaching is ultimately a waste of time if, A, the person that you're coaching is uncoachable. In other words, they're resistant to, the coaching that you're giving them, or B, they have a desire to change, but ultimately, they leave that coaching session with you and never actually take the steps to changing. So, based on what we've just talked about, what would be your approach for getting me to start to commit to making changes, implementing things that you've coached me on, and kind of going from having no success, maybe doing nothing from a content strategy to actually putting these things into practice?
Yeah, again, I mean, we talk about mindset a lot, and we all have this kind of warped view of what success looks like. So I would encourage you to go, look, let's stop celebrating likes and comments and shares, and let's start celebrating consistency of kind of content creation. So I'd much rather the people that I work with say, hey, Tom, I've posted 5 times this week and I'm ready to post 5 times again next week. That for me is more successful than someone saying, "Oh, I posted once and it got quite good engagement." You know, I often say, "Look, this is a long term thing, and the consistency piece is so important." It's not about posting for the sake of it, but actually, if you can be a consistent voice on the platform and always add value, that's the V word that I like to say. That's what we should be celebrating. So easy to, you know, post post a selfie or post something that you think, okay, that might get a few likes, and let's kind of celebrate that. But actually, it's more about, does my content align with my mission statement? Am I adding value to my network? And am I doing that consistently every week? That's what success looks like for me.
So good. Well, thanks, Tom. I'm just going to wrap up with some of my biggest takeaways from the conversation we had today. Even though there's lots of big takeaways, but number one, I love this phrase: "Be the ambassador for the problem that you solve." I think we're thinking about this content strategy. Think about being the ambassador, the voice for the problem that you solve, and let that lead you, and create those maybe 3 big buckets of problems that you solve, and using that as your kind of content flywheel. Um, the other thing that you sort of dropped in is, if you're still struggling, bring things to life through your own prospecting activities, that the experiences that you're having on the cold call that you had, where the prospect was telling you their world, even if their world seemed perfect, and that actually that's full of problems. Give that perspective. The content ideas are probably they're probably there in the other prospecting that you're doing on a daily basis. And then thirdly is helping, as far as people go in action these things, is stop trying to obsess over likes and comments. Start obsessing more on consistency of content creation. I can vouch for this as someone who's played the long game on this myself, and go from posting 0 times, start to build that up to 2 or 3 times a week, and maybe over time you get it to daily. Thanks so much to everybody for tuning in. Tune in next time for our next coaching conundrum. And it's goodbye from me, and goodbye from Tom. My sales coach expertly matches individuals and teams to their very best fit sales coach. From our highly curated set of coaches, we can unlock the potential. We're able to address and overcome the many challenges facing your teams by giving people access to the coaching they need and deserve. Please go to www.mysalescoach.com to book a time to speak with us to find out more.